There are moments that change everything, not with fireworks or fanfare, but with silence. A single gesture at an immigration desk, a screen that flickers, a decision that's already been made. This is one of those moments. Dubai was supposed to be the reset button, a place where luxury meets discretion, where the past could fade into marble floors and golden sunsets. Meghan Markle arrived with every detail perfected, hair immaculate, outfit flawless, confidence radiating. She wasn't just visiting, she was reinventing, but the red carpet never rolled out. Her passport was scanned, routine, expected. Then something shifted. A line of text appeared on the screen. No one needed to read it aloud. The officer's face said everything. She was asked to step aside, not aggressively, not dramatically, just firmly. Away from the cameras, away from the crowd, into a private room where time moves differently and air feels heavier. No press statement followed. No official explanation. No frantic phone calls that changed anything. Dubai doesn't negotiate, it decides. And in that moment, the decision had already been made long before her plane touched down. When she emerged, witnesses describe a woman transformed. Not shocked, not confused. Furious, jaw clenched, eyes cold, moving fast without saying a word. No carefully crafted Instagram post, no statement from representatives, just silence. The kind that echoes louder than any explanation ever could. Because here's what most people don't understand about power. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It simply closes the door and moves on. And when Dubai closes a door, the world pays attention. Dubai isn't impulsive. Every decision flows through one filter: risk versus reward. This is a city built on image, stability, and long-term strategy. It doesn't bend for celebrity status. It doesn't care about your title or your following. It asks one question: are you worth the potential problems you bring? In that private room, the answer was no. Let's be clear about what this means. Dubai has hosted controversial figures from every corner of the globe: billionaires with questionable pasts, politicians with complicated histories, celebrities with scandals trailing behind them. None of that matters if you bring one essential quality: predictability. Predictability means you won't create headlines that force them to answer uncomfortable questions. It means you won't drag them into dramas they didn't sign up for. It means your presence adds value without adding complications. Meghan's profile had become the opposite. Too many unresolved questions, too much media volatility, too many stories that kept shifting. High staff turnover whispered about in private circles, legal disputes that never quite settled. Financial pressure that kept mounting, relationship tension that tabloids fed on daily. None of this needed to be proven true, it only needed to exist loudly enough to register as a liability. And once something registers as a liability in Dubai's system, the calculation is simple. The risk outweighs the benefit. That's when doors close without drama, without explanation, without second chances. Here's what nobody tells you about influence at this level. Reputation doesn't move through press releases or social media statements. It travels through private conversations, quiet assessments, former colleagues who no longer speak publicly but still speak privately. By the time Meghan's passport reached that scanner, the evaluation had already happened. Backgrounds reviewed, patterns noted, behavior tracked across borders, industries, timelines. Public statements weighed against private reports. Everything measured not by guilt or innocence, but by one metric: volatility. And volatility is the one thing power structures cannot tolerate. When Dubai made its decision, it wasn't acting alone. It was acting on information that had been circulating for months. Staff departures that seemed too frequent. Projects announced with fanfare that never quite materialized. Strategic pivots that looked more like panic than planning. None of this lives in headlines alone. It lives in quiet files shared among people whose entire job is to prevent disruption before it arrives. They don't need proof beyond reasonable doubt. They need probability, and the probability had shifted firmly into the red zone. This is why what happened in Dubai matters far beyond one denied entry. It sent a signal that travels faster than any news cycle. If Dubai said no without hesitation, other places were watching. Other decision makers were taking notes. Other systems were running their own calculations. And when those systems start reaching the same conclusion independently, options disappear fast. While Dubai made headlines, the real pressure was building somewhere else. Back in Montecito, behind the gates and the palm trees, a different kind of scrutiny was tightening like a vice. Financial questions that wouldn't go away, legal shadows that never fully stepped into the light but never disappeared either. projects that required constant explanation before they could even begin, every conversation becoming cautious, every commitment becoming conditional. This is where most people misunderstand how pressure actually works. It doesn't arrive with sirens and subpoenas, it arrives quietly. Through paperwork that takes longer to process, through deals that stall without clear reason, through partners who suddenly need more time to think. Montecito was supposed to be freedom, distance from royal protocol, distance from tabloid surveillance, distance from expectations. Instead, it became a pressure chamber where lifestyle and reality stopped aligning. Expenses kept rising while certainty kept shrinking. Every month felt heavier than the last. And here's the uncomfortable truth. When someone is under sustained scrutiny in the United States, every other nation considering engagement must ask itself one question. What happens if this escalates while they're on our soil? Nobody wants to answer that. So the safest move becomes the simplest one. Create distance. Decline quietly. Let someone else inherit the risk. After Dubai, there was still one whispered possibility. Saudi Arabia, enormous capital. Global ambition, a region actively building cultural influence through entertainment, sports, and media. If anywhere could overlook the noise and focus on opportunity, many assumed it would be there. That assumption was wrong. Because Saudi decision-making doesn't follow celebrity logic, it follows sovereign logic. Variables are assessed not by popularity, but by predictability. Can this person strengthen our system or destabilize it? There's no middle ground. Insiders describe the response as polite but distant. Meetings that explored possibilities without committing to outcomes. Conversations that stayed abstract. Interest without momentum. That's how rejection looks at the highest level. They don't slam doors, they simply never unlock them. The reason was identical to Dubai's calculation. Too many unresolved questions. Too much narrative volatility. Too much potential for distraction. In regions where image is tightly controlled, hosting someone who attracts constant controversy isn't bold, it's reckless. And here's the detail that makes this moment pivotal. When both Dubai and Saudi Arabia reach similar conclusions independently, it's not coincidence, it's consensus. And consensus among power structures reshapes maps quickly. Suddenly options contract, safe havens disappear, doors that seemed open reveal themselves as illusions. What remains isn't opportunity, it's limitation. There's a moment in every collapse that feels surreal, not because it's sudden, but because it's complete. After Dubai stayed silent and Saudi Arabia remained distant, something shifted across the board. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations ended earlier than expected. Interest cooled without explanation. This is what it looks like when a profile reaches saturation. When the question stops being, can she succeed somewhere else? And becomes, would hosting her import problems we didn't sign up for? That question kills momentum instantly. This is when ambition turns into urgency, moves become faster, decisions feel rushed, strategies appear improvised. What once looked like long-term planning starts resembling escape planning. New narratives get introduced before previous ones are resolved. Announcements get teased but never finalized. Each attempt leaves behind more questions than answers. And here's the most unsettling part. When exits close simultaneously across regions that rarely coordinate, it means something deeper is happening. The same assessment is being reached independently over and over, too volatile, too unpredictable, too much risk for too little return. At this stage, even allies hesitate, not because loyalty disappears, but because proximity becomes dangerous. Association feels like endorsement. Endorsement invites scrutiny, and scrutiny invites cost nobody wants to pay. When pressure has nowhere else to go, it turns inward. This is where global rejection stops being abstract and becomes deeply personal, where strategic failures stop living in boardrooms and start living in private conversations behind closed doors. Money changes everything, not because it disappears overnight, but because it becomes unreliable. Deals that felt guaranteed begin to feel fragile, promises stretch, timelines slip, and every conversation about the future circles back to the same question: how long can this last? Reports suggest the cracks began showing not as explosive fights, but as constant friction. Disagreements over direction, over spending, over strategy. One side pushing for structure and restraint, the other pushing for movement and escape. Those instincts aren't compatible. In relationships built under pressure, alignment matters more than affection. When both people stop wanting the same future, Love becomes secondary to logistics. Sources describe arguments becoming sharper, less filtered, not about love, about control, about who decides the next move, about who carries the blame for doors that stopped opening. And then the most damaging shift of all, solo decisions. When one partner starts acting independently, making moves without full alignment, it signals a breakdown far deeper than any public narrative suggests. Trust erodes, embarrassment sets in, resentment grows. This is when marriage stops being a shield and starts becoming another vulnerability, another variable that outsiders assess, another layer of instability on top of an already volatile profile. The most telling shift didn't come with an announcement, it came with silence, not outrage. Not cancellation, just the slow, unmistakable quiet that settles when interest evaporates. Brands don't collapse when people criticize them. They collapse when people stop asking questions. When curiosity turns into calculation. When potential partners decide it's safer to wait than to engage. What once looked like a glossy enterprise began to feel heavy and overextended. Every initiative required explanation before it could begin. Every proposal came with footnotes. Every conversation opened with hesitation instead of excitement. Investors recognize one danger above all: uncontainable downside. Failure can be managed. Failure can be priced. What cannot be managed is reputational spillover that drags partners into controversies they didn't cause and cannot control. At this stage, that risk had become impossible to ignore. Projects slowed, timelines stretched, commitments softened. Not because money disappeared, but because nobody wanted their name attached to something that felt unstable. The brand required too much defense, too many explanations, too many clarifications. Strong brands don't need constant justification. Weak brands do. This is why silence from major partners mattered more than any headline. Silence signals distance. Distance signals caution. And caution spreads fast among people who talk behind closed doors. Nobody wanted to be the last one holding exposure. There's a moment when a narrative stops belonging to the person who created it. It doesn't happen with a scandal. It happens when control quietly changes hands. For years, the strategy relied on framing, on timing, on carefully chosen silences and selective disclosures. Every criticism could be countered. Every setback could be reframed as persecution or misunderstanding. That system stopped working. Supporters stopped arguing as fiercely. Defenses grew repetitive. Explanations sounded recycled. Then something far more dangerous happened. The audience stopped listening. When people disengage emotionally, narratives lose oxygen. Criticism becomes mockery. Debate becomes indifference. And indifference is fatal to influence. This is where social media becomes a mirror. Memes replaced analysis. Sarcasm replaced outrage. Even former defenders began asking questions they once dismissed. Does she still control the story, or is the story controlling her? That question spread fast. Once it takes hold, no messaging can erase it. Every new initiative gets interpreted as desperation. Every appearance feels like performance. Every silence reads as damage control. The benefit of the doubt disappears. At the end of every rise, there's a moment when noise fades and clarity settles in. Not the clarity offered by statements or interviews, but the kind that comes when patterns stop being debated and start being accepted. This is that moment. The story is no longer about glamour or rebellion. It's about consequence. About what happens when ambition outruns structure, when narrative replaces strategy, when momentum is mistaken for permanence. What unfolded wasn't a single failure. It was a chain reaction. Each piece alone could have been managed. Together, they formed something decisive, a ceiling. Fame opens doors. Behavior determines how long they stay open. Influence attracts attention. Stability keeps it. When stability disappears, attention becomes dangerous rather than useful. The world didn't turn hostile. It turned cautious. And caution doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It simply steps back. To rebuild from here would require something far harder than a rebrand. It would require silence without resentment, consistency without performance, time without urgency, a willingness to let attention drift away rather than chase it. Those aren't easy disciplines for anyone whose identity has been shaped by visibility. The greatest irony? Nothing external needs to happen now for the outcome to change. No new scandal is required. The trajectory is already set by what has accumulated. Momentum has reversed. The only uncertainty left is how the story concludes. Quiet stabilization or public unraveling, gradual irrelevance or deliberate withdrawal, controlled reset or prolonged exposure. That decision can't be outsourced. It can't be spun, it can't be rushed. There's a lesson buried in this entire saga, though most will refuse to see it. Power doesn't care about your story, it doesn't care about fairness, context, or intention. It cares about one thing: predictability. Systems at the highest level are designed to protect themselves, not individuals. They assess risk, calculate exposure, and make decisions based on probability, not personality. When someone becomes too unpredictable, too volatile, too high maintenance, they stop being an opportunity and become a liability. And liabilities get managed the same way everywhere, with distance, no drama, no public rejection, just quiet, efficient separation. That's what happened in Dubai. That's what happened in Saudi Arabia. That's what's happening now across boardrooms, investment meetings, and private conversations worldwide. The uncomfortable truth is that once you're flagged as high risk in these circles, redemption doesn't come from explanations or apologies. It comes from demonstrating long-term behavioral change. Not for months, but for years. Not through press tours, but through silence and consistency. Power structures don't forgive quickly because they don't forget patterns. They wait, they watch. And only when the pattern breaks completely do they reconsider. So here we are, standing at a crossroads where every direction looks uncertain. The past is unrecoverable, the present is unsustainable, and the future depends entirely on choices that haven't been made yet. Will there be a retreat into privacy, a genuine step back that allows time and distance to do what no PR campaign ever could? Or will there be more attempts to force relevance, to manufacture comebacks, to prove something to a world that's already made up its mind? The answer to that question will determine everything. Because right now the world isn't hostile, it's just tired. Tired of the drama, tired of the explanations, tired of being asked to care. And when the world gets tired, the worst thing you can do is demand more attention. The smartest move would be silence, real silence, not the strategic kind that teases a comeback, but the kind that signals acceptance. Acceptance that the game has changed, that the rules are different now, that what worked before won't work again. But silence requires humility, and humility requires admitting that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't wrong, that maybe the doors closed for reasons worth examining rather than dismissing, that maybe the pattern everyone else saw wasn't a conspiracy, but a consequence. That's the hardest truth of all. And whether it gets accepted or rejected will write the final chapter of this story. For now, the world watches, not with anticipation, not with anger, just with a quiet, patient curiosity about what happens when someone who once commanded the spotlight finally learns what happens when the spotlight moves on,